Hey there guys, Andrew with A-Team Adventures, back on the water. And I've had a few of my friends specifically ask me about pitching and flipping, and so I thought I'd do a little bit more of a in-depth video specifically on pitching and flipping. I don't do much for flipping, but I do pitch a lot, flipping was kind of probably, I don't know, maybe, I don't want to use the word old, but some other word, something that we don't typically do as much now. It involved, preferably a very long rod, stripping, putting out basically as much line as you could, probably about that long, but then taking an armful of it, okay? And it involved reaching out and setting it in place, and I guess the deal with it is you could be super fast and really, that wasn't very gentle, but you could be really accurate and very gentle in place, and you could, depending on your wingspan, so we could even pull a little more out, but based on your rod and wingspan, you could put a bait out there quite a ways and be very gentle and very fast, because we can go from spot to spot to spot really quickly and accurately and quickly. That does not seem to be as popular anymore. I'm not saying it doesn't have its place, but it seems that now pitching is a lot more popular, and that's what I've really grown up doing, is pitching. And so you've usually got your bait in one hand, and this is probably the best way to practice, but bait in one hand, about close to real height, or maybe just a hair above, and you're just letting this fall and letting the momentum of the bait carry it out. And when you do that, you can just start by absolutely very gentle fluid movement. You're not trying to put pressure on the rod. You're not loading the rod tip and springing it. I guess there are some crappie fishermen, and the way their baits work, they do kind of load the rod tip up and it shoots it, basically. That's not what you're doing with this. This is just a pendulum, where you're just pendulating, letting it go, letting it fall, and sending it out with the rod tip. And then you're taking your thumb off the spool and letting line go out and thumbing it at the spot where you want it to hit, so you can be really gentle. And it allows you to be fast and very accurate. It's a very accurate presentation, and you can get more distance than just a flip. You can, by pitching it, you can get more distance than you can, because your flipping was limited to the length of your rod and your wingspan. So if you were short, or you had a short rod, you couldn't go very far. It was, that was all you had. But by flipping it, by pitching it rather, I mean, you can go out 30, 40 feet if you really want to. If you really want to put some swing, you're using the rod, the hand that's holding the rod is putting the energy behind it. This hand's just holding it and letting it go, and you're using your rod hand to put a little lift in it. And some people like to pitch this way. I've found that the ergonomic wise, your wrist is made to roll like this, not so much go up and down. So I tend to find that I roll the rod over and let my wrist, you're using your arm, but a lot of it's in the wrist that you're making that roll with your wrist, and you can get a bit of a snap and really send it out there. And you can be fairly gentle in your presentation, and that's something to work on. You can be fairly gentle, so it barely makes a splash when it enters the water. I mean, just the teeniest little ripple. And what you'll find is that you'll catch a lot more fish by doing that. Now, if we took this bait, we way up in the air and just splat, our percentages would go way down, because you're spooking those fish as it's entering the water. But if we go out wasn't really the best shot, but we go out and we make a very little splash. It's surprising. So it goes in and doesn't slap the water and make a big splash. You're getting a much better chance of just surprising those fish. The bait just comes by them, and we've talked about this in other videos, but it comes by them and they don't have hands. They can't just move it out of the way, so either they have to move out of the way or they put it in their mouth. It's just a reaction, just like if we were to surprise someone coming around the corner and we're, hey, you know, and well, sometimes they freeze, sometimes they jump back, and you might even get someone that reaches out and kind of hits you. But that's what a fish needs to do. If it's right there in their face and surprises them, they have to either get out of the way or lash out at it, and many times they'll lash right out on it because they didn't see it coming. It just appeared, and so you're usually pitching to very specific pieces of cover. It's not just random. It'll be, you know, chunks of grass we've got out here. We've got a few, you know, pieces of chunks of grass that are just emergent coming out of the water, and so we would target all of those. And you'd work your way through and you try to find something unique. You know, you're not just hopefully pitching at random. You're pitching to very specific cover. So sometimes you'll be going down a shoreline and it all looks the same, except, oh, there's a creek that comes in, a little inlet. Well, that's, you know, that could be the spot. And you find you're going down the bank and bam, okay, you catch 3 or 4 right around there. Well, that's the key thing. Now we're looking for inlets as we go down the bank. Go to those key inlets all the way down the bank and pitching to those ones, not just random spots. Maybe you go down and it's where 2 types of weeds come together and they're right on that seam. They like edges, so they're right on that seam maybe where those 2 types of weeds come together. Maybe it's the outside edge, maybe it's the inside of the edge of the weeds. And what I mean by that is you'll get usually along the bank, there'll be a spot where the weeds stop and it turns to maybe sand or something up to the bank. And then there's outside, it's where the weeds usually stop growing, and sometimes that's due to sunlight. There's not enough sunlight for the weeds to grow up and reach the sun and grow. It's too deep. Sometimes maybe it has to do with bottom content, as in maybe it turned from mud to sand, and so the weeds don't grow there, or maybe there's a steep break, and that would be, you know, water depth, but maybe there's a steep break all of a sudden. So by putting multiple differences in cover together, you have a much higher percentage chance of catching those fish. So you're looking for that when you're pitching. You're not just pitching hopefully at random. Maybe it starts out a little bit random, but you're trying to be specific. Okay, I pitched to that and I pitched to that, and oh, that's where I got my bite. And what was different about that? Oh, there was a rock, you know, next to the weeds. Okay, so is that a pattern, or is that just, you know, so quote unquote random? And so you just keep trying things. Maybe there's a place where the weeds form a point, or maybe a cove. When they're more active, they'll tend to be on the point. When they're less active, they'll tend to be in the cove. And this is true over, you know, the whole lake, as well as even in the weeds. On a macro and a micro level, you know, you're looking for these patterns as well. So, you know, we're pitching along. We can be quiet, we can be stealthy, and that is the technique. Rolling your wrist, and now we've talked about some of the things to look for, and use your imagination as you're going through. Just, you know, I haven't listed every piece of cover. There's all kinds of cover out there. You know, it could be treetops, it could be, I mean, it really doesn't matter, brush clumps, but you know, usually you're pitching to some type of cover. It can be in a few feet of water, it can be in 25 feet of water, just depending on what it is. Now in shallow cover, this doesn't, I'm going to walk you through something, it doesn't matter as much, but I'll make a pitch and set it in there. In shallow cover, you don't necessarily need so much line. You know, if we're in a few feet of water, not a big deal. You do want that bait to fall on a semi-slack line. If you keep that line tight, so let's say I pitch it out there and it's right there. Well, you know, and the line's tight and the rod is used up all its slack and it's low to the ground, I have nowhere to go with it, that bait is going to have to fall. So if it's stretched right out, it's going to have to fall to get down. It's going to have to come towards me. It can't just fall straight down. it has to pendulum down. Well, that's not what you want. Usually you're hitting a very specific piece of cover, and if you put it right on the spot, you don't want it to fall down. If it's 3 feet and it's at a 45-degree angle, well, you're going to be 3 feet away. You're not really close to your target anymore. You want it to fall straight down on target. So when I pitch it out there, sometimes I'll finish with my rod up high so I can follow that bait down and watch my line. Now if I'm pitching down a bank and I know it's about 3 feet, and you can, once you do it a little bit, you'll start realizing this comes very natural. But you'll find that, the bait is following a pretty consistent, maybe you're counting 3 to 4 seconds, and you're watching that line fall, and pretty consistently it falls. Well, let's say you're going down and you make a pitch. Yeah, okay, it should have stopped there, but it keeps going, and you're seeing your line go, and you're okay. Wow, the line just keeps going. Well, probably a fish picked that up. The depth probably didn't make some radical change there, but probably a fish picked it up as it was following and just started swimming away with it. So you're going to want to wind down with it, and if in that case he's probably swimming away or to some way that the line is, he's not going directly away. Maybe you might feel the pressure more, but let's just say it's steady, the line just kind of disappears. Well, then you're going to wind down to him and set the hook. You don't want to leave a bunch of slack in the line and snap it. You're going to pop the bait right out of his mouth, and you'll probably do more damage to the fish. So you want to reel down so there's pretty consistent pressure that you can feel, and set the hook. And when you do that, you don't want to wind down to him, then leave a bunch of slack and slap it again. You just want to wind down to him and set the hook. A nice smooth move. Fluid maybe is the right word. So if we're in really deep water, you might pitch it out there and leave, finish very high. And if we're in super deep water, you might just have to keep pulling out line, let it hit the bottom. Okay, it hits the bottom, and you're right there. Okay, yep, and you feel it. And typically, when I'm pitching and flipping, I'm looking to keep moving. It's that fall, and maybe when it hits the bottom, pick it up, put it down, pick it up, put it down. Maybe bounce it. Sometimes you'll find that, a hop, a double hop is best. Sometimes just picking it up and kind of shaking it up on the top of, let's say it's a weed mat. Sometimes pulling it up to the surface and kind of shaking it up to the surface works. You're probably imitating a bluegill there, where they're looking for bugs, and so they're up at the surface picking bugs. So pulling it up to the top of the mat and kind of shaking it would imitate a bluegill up there mindlessly picking bugs while a bass is going to sneak up and grab him. If you're on the bottom and doing like a double hop, that's probably more of a crayfish. And crayfish are in rocks, but there are a ton of crayfish in weeds. Sometimes it's a little bit of a, I don't know, I guess, a miss to think that they're just in rocks. They are in weeds as well. So if you're down on the bottom and you find that the fish are constantly eating your bait on the bottom, not up off the bottom, well, probably that's a bass that's hunting crayfish. And so letting it hit the bottom and doing maybe a double hop with your reel, because that's what crayfish do. They go up and they go out. They go up and they go out. So it's kind of a double hop if you watch a crayfish. So you're just trying to put pieces of the puzzle together on what might be going on. Let's see, what else am I missing? I'll go back to the house and talk real specifics about rod, reel, line, baits, but this is just more the how-to and what I'm looking for specifically on the water, and we're going to try to catch a few here, hopefully on video, but this is just the some information that some friends were looking for, so I thought I'd put it in a video as well, and hopefully we can all benefit from it. All right, well, we'll hopefully catch a few fish on video, and then do the final in the back in the garage. All right. One thing I forgot to mention was it is far easier for me to swap hands and make a pitch. I can be more accurate. I've done it more. I can pitch farther with my right hand, although I reel with my right as well, so I have to swap the rod. Now, you know, some people are very good at, you know, pitching as you get better, and I'm working on it. But some people are really good with their left hand, and they'll make pitches this way. They'll pitch the bait out, and they don't have to swap hands, and that's something to strive for. It's something I work on, but my left is not as strong as my right, and I tend to make, as you saw there, a bigger splash. I'm not quite as gentle in my presentation if I am making that presentation, but it is something to work on, and if it comes natural for you, certainly do that. It's faster, and you never are without the rod in your hand. If the fish bites your bait immediately, you're right there, you're ready to go. You're not caught by surprise where someone like me, if we're having to swap hands, they could bite it and it might take me half a second to be ready for it, where if you can just wind in and go, and you know, obviously giving it time, but wind in and go, you're obviously ahead of the game by doing that. That's not as natural for me, but it's something to work on, and just wanted to, you know, kind of give you that. But don't be too upset if you find that, well, really I need to use my right hand and swap hands. That's okay. We're going to allow it. Out here fishing, I'm actually now fishing, and some things popped into my head that you know, you might want to try yourself. But I've pulled into this bay, and I'm using my ears right now to tell me, you know, it's not a guarantee, but is this bay maybe a higher percentage spot? And what I'm listening for are the bluegill, up in the shallows, picking those bugs off. And we talked about that, holding your bait up high in the water, you know, up against maybe a grass mat or the lily pads and shaking it up there. And sometimes you'll get bites doing that, or on the bottom, hopping it off the bottom. And the up top is probably fish chasing a bluegill, and down on the bottom might be fish chasing a crayfish, something like that. So, and maybe even in between is just, who knows what that could be. But sometimes they'll take it on the fall or something. That being said, I'm in this bay, so I'm listening for bluegill, and they make this sort of kissing, popping sort of sound as a sound, and they're up there trying to suck the bugs down. And sometimes you'll even hear them, you know, kind of see them swirling. But I just heard another one, you know, that popping, kissing sort of sound, and I've heard a bunch of them in here. So that means there are for sure bluegill in here, which pretty typically means there's bass. It's not a guarantee you'll go into a bay and they're popping like crazy and not a single bass or not a catchable bass, and that happens. But more often than not, if you're hearing those bluegill in there popping, there are bass, and there are probably some catchable. And then the other thing was, there was another one, but the other thing is electronics. I do use my electronics when I'm pitching and flipping sometimes, if we're in deeper cover, but sometimes in very shallow cover, especially when it's pretty calm, there isn't a lot of wind going on, there isn't a lot of disturbance, so they're going to hear everything. So I try to turn my trolling motor down and be consistent. Sometimes I'll just be on it very consistent at a very slow speed and just drift very consistently, so it's not on, off, on, off, on, off. And you're running it up to 8 and just whoa, and the water goes churning everywhere. You don't want that. They're gonna hear you coming from a mile away. They're probably gonna have some idea you're there anyway, but if you can, you know, and you know, I liken this to, you know, maybe war, you know, or hunting or something, but if you can make them think that you're maybe 50 yards away when you're really, you know, 20, that might be all you need to get them to bite your bait, as opposed to when maybe they wouldn't. So you're just trying to be quieter, calmer, and then it goes for the electronics. I will often, if we're in cover like this right now, it's very shallow, and I can see everything. It's a bit of a stain, but I can still see everything. I've got my electronics shut right off. I don't want them pinging. It makes a loud ping, and you can hear it just in your garage. If you were to turn it on in your garage, you can hear it just in your garage. But underwater, sound transmits very well. I do a little scuba diving, and boy, it's amazing what you can hear under the water. It's amazing how the sound transmits. Well, they can certainly hear that, and if they're a smart bass, a big bass, they've probably heard that before and noticed that all of a sudden baits come flying at them, and they're more cautious. Now maybe a small fish doesn't know that yet, I'm not knocking catching small fish, but you're probably out there to catch some bigger fish, pitching and flipping. This is like more of a punch rig or a slither rig, but a jig or a slither rig or something like that. Geez, this is more of a big fish bait, and that's what we're out here to catch. Hopefully, are some bigger fish. So you're not trying to tip them and alert them that you're, oh, here I am. So just a couple things that I was thinking of and wanted to share, and this will probably happen a couple more times, and hopefully we're going to get some fish on video. Tighten that drag up a little. Not a big one, but it's a fish. Oh, okay, it's okay. It's skinny, but it's okay. There we go. There we go. I'd say that was the fish that jumped. So you see, it pays to keep your eyes open. If we didn't see that fish jump, I don't think I would have kept pitching back to that same spot over and over again. So there we go. There's a fish. Put this one back. Oh, something I realized I didn't finish as I was talking to you earlier about watching your line and how important that is. I covered watching it if it just kind of keeps going when you know it should have already hit bottom. But you also want to pay attention to your line. Let's say it's going down and it stopped short. Probably again, it went halfway down and the fish took it as it fell. Or sometimes you'll even see your line kind of jump. The line will kind of come out. If that's where it's hitting it so hard that it's coming up at it, the line kind of jumps on you. If you see any of that, again, probably a fish, and you want to reel down and again set the hook on it. So I just realized I did not fully finish my thought. I covered one aspect very thoroughly, and then just left that whole line watching alone. And there's many more reasons to watch your line than just because it kind of could keep running. So it is very important to be a line watcher. It pays. And obviously you're looking for feeling too, but sometimes you can see them before you feel them. Life changing right there. Still feels good though, even if they're small. Oh. There we go. Okay, put that one back. Get bigger. Again, not a giant, just a little one. Kind of skinny. I'm gonna give this guy the same motivational speech. Get bigger, We're fixing to catch a fish. This looks fishy. It's why I, in this spot, is the weeds reach out and the channel is real close right here, so it lends itself to being a spot that is a little higher percentage. They've got plenty of room to go back up in there if they want to, but they're also really close to deep, cooler water. And so, targeting this outside edge is a little higher percentage spot. Doesn't mean we're going to catch one or a big one, but that's what we're shooting. Not a giant, but a little better fish. fish right there. Not bad. And now that one was pinned just like it's supposed to be. You see this right in the roof of the mouth. I mean, that's how it's supposed to be all the time. Okay. Let's get you back in the water, big girl. Oh wow, this fish has been through the war. Wow. Well, let's get that one back in the water. Let it get and stay healthy. Boy, that was a feisty fish. When we catch them, they are fighting really, really hard. I mean, they are aggressive, but boy, it takes a little bit to catch them. Guys, one more. Okay guys, back in the garage in the boat, and just trying to put the final pieces together. So covering some of the other parts, the rod, reel, line, maybe some of the baits. You can use whatever it is you are most comfortable with. If you aren't super comfortable with the technique, you can borrow some of my confidence in the baits that I'm very confident in. So I guess starting with the baits, boy, when it's warm weather, I have a hard time not starting with the Rage Bug. It's not huge, but when these arms get moving, it moves a ton of water. These open up and they kick like crazy because it's got the Rage feet on it, and it kicks like crazy. It's fairly flat, so when you're trying to skip it, let's say you're trying to skip this bait, it's fairly flat, so it skips very well. It doesn't roll on you too badly. It stays, fairly level. It doesn't roll when it comes back in very much. It stays pretty level because it's got all these appendages that keep it steady and kick and make it steady. So I really like this one, and it moves quite a bit of water. And so I like this one when the water is fairly warm. I have a hard time not starting with it. It's got enough plastic to put your hook into it and keep it from getting hung up on everything. Some baits are so thin, the minute you get your hook in and the barb catches, the point is already sticking out of the bait, which isn't very useful for me. Now, depending on how what hook you use, it might be just fine. So we'll come back to hooks in a little bit, but I really like that bait. If you're looking for something on a budget, this is just, you can buy a ton of these cheap. It's the Skeet Reese, it's the Pit Boss, and it's hard to beat. For budget bait, it is hard to beat. It holds up okay. You'll usually catch one or two fish with it, and it's gone. But it's got enough thickness. It does tend to roll if you're skipping it. It's more kind of round, and so it tends to roll a little bit more. But it still has pretty good action when it kicks, and so I like it pretty well. This one, if you're looking for some, this is the Strike King Rage. I don't think it's not the lobster size, but the crawfish, and again, works tremendously well. These kick like crazy, move a ton of water, and it's fairly slender, going, if you're trying to get through cover, but these claws will hang you up a little bit. This bait probably comes through the cover just a little bit better, But if you're looking for something with a lot of action, I also use that for sometimes for a trailer on a swim jig or something. If I want a craw trailer, that works really well. Moves a ton of water. Very effective. I like using that. If I need something that truly just comes right through cover and has minimal action, I'll usually use a Senko. And you can use whatever brand you want. I actually I kind of like when I'm using it, you know, and I'm flipping it, because I'm using a straight shank hook again. That's what I prefer. I want something that's actually a little tougher, so I will often go to an off-brand, you know, worm, a Senko worm, a straight tail worm. I will go with sometimes like the Bass Pro Shops brand, something like that. And the plastic isn't as good. I'll admit that. The plastic is not as good. It's actually very tough. So if you're trying to use it like rigging it wacky or something kind of like that, it's probably not my favorite technique. And if you're using, you know, this style hook, you know, not a straight shank hook, like a worm hook, I would say this probably isn't my favorite bait, because it is tougher, and I would guess that the fish can feel it and it doesn't feel as good, but it holds up better when I'm flipping it with a straight shank hook. So sometimes I'll go with an off-brand, but the rest of the time I'll probably spend a little extra money and get a better quality one. But just a little side sort of tip for you. You can flip. I mean, I will flip. I'll try all kinds of stuff. I mean, you can flip, you know, anything. If you're looking for something super narrow to get through cover, boy, you know, that Zoom little Cricket is unbelievable, because it's super skinny. It still has some pretty good action, but super skinny. I've used, and this is a Erie Yamamoto little craw. I don't use it a lot, but in super clear water, sometimes it's just a business. When they've seen everything with huge kicking action, something with almost no action. I mean, these claws hardly move. I mean, they'll move a little bit when you're moving the bait, but they don't have any, you know, kickers on them. They're just plain old little claws. So sometimes, you know, and typically for me, it's really clear water, sometimes pressured fish. That works better. In cold water, I'll usually go with something with very little action. So we could go back to something like that. Or I'll go with like a Sweet Beaver. It doesn't have any kickers on it. It will, of course, it will move a little bit when you're dragging the bait. You know, these will move a little bit, but they don't have, you know, like the Rage products have these big paddles on them, you know, big paddles, and they move a lot of water. Well, this doesn't. This is a dead action kind of bait. You have to pretty much impart all the action if you're gonna, you know, shake your rod tip and get that to move a little bit. But you know, in cold water, I will typically use a very dead action bait. But again, you use what you're most comfortable with. You want to have confidence in what you're doing. So if you're super confident in something, you know, totally different than what I've listed, there's a ton of good products out there. You can only, you know, use so many of them at any given time. So, you know, this is kind of what I typically stick to. But if there is something that you're really confident in, use that. Don't reinvent the wheel. Don't go with something that you have no confidence in. But if you don't have any confidence in any of this is all new to you, well, borrow my confidence. I have used this over and over again and caught fish, just, you know, piles of them. And I will, you know, use a couple different ones in warm water, cold water, and color choices. I keep it very basic. If the water is, you know, pretty clear to just a mild stain, I'm going to typically start off with something extremely natural. I mean, you're seeing, you know, kind of a pattern here. I mean, we look at how many of the baits I pulled out and how many of them. I mean, I got a whole, I don't know if you can see that or not very well, but a whole bunch of them. And they're all somewhat natural. A green pumpkin, you know, candy, you know, green pumpkin candy, green pumpkin red flake, green pumpkin red flake, you know, green pumpkin green flake, you know, green pumpkin black flake. You know, pretty much It is natural, natural, natural. And then I will, oh sure, if there's a little bit of stain, I might use something with a little bit of a mixture in it. I might even use something, you know, here's a good example. This is another one, another color that I sometimes use. I will use something with a little orange in it. There's, you know, kind of a green pumpkin, but it's got a little orange in it. Especially if the crayfish, you know, in my area, they typically get a little orange. So having something with a little orange, this one's got a lot more orange in it, but you know, that one's got, you know, a lot more orange in it, but still, you know, very natural. Crayfish in my area have quite a bit of orange in them typically. So they're kind of a dark green with orange. And so, I mean, this mimics that pretty well perfectly. So I will, you know, stick to something as fairly natural looking as I possibly can. And then if the water's stained, yeah, I will mix it up. I might even go with a black and blue. I might go with, I mean, this one, I mean, you can't get more bright. And boy, there are days when that just flat out, you know, it's like a sapphire blue. I mean, you can see that in the dark practically. But there are days when it just works. And in the more stained the water, the more I'm going to go with something that's bold and stands out, a black and blue, something that's, you know, very bright. But dark colors will still work in clear water as well, so don't rule that out. But I typically lean away from them myself. But some of you are going to say, well, I use a black creature bait or black and blue jig all the time, and I catch water all the time in any color water, no matter how clear or dirty it is. And that is true. You absolutely can do that. It's not my confidence. I find that in clearer water, I do better with something very natural. But experiment with it and see what you find and use what you have confidence in. But don't be afraid to try a few different things. The other day we were out on the water and we went from everything from super natural to black and blue. To a whole bunch of different, you know, creature baits, and I can't say one really worked way better than the other. You know, they were at times nipping at it, and then they'd get it down their throat, and that happened with, you know, quite a few different baits. I would guess that having a tremendous giant bait on it wouldn't have been the deal, but something a little bit compact. And then let's keep moving. So hooks real quickly. We kind of covered that. You know, some people, and I understand some of the reason why. If you're looking for a hook that, you know, doesn't get hung up very easily and comes through cover very well, and keeps the bait intact a little longer. So if it's really important to you to get maximum use out of your bait, you know, something like this, really an EWG style hook is tremendous. That's a Strike King, but you know, anything. This is a super line hook. I typically am using braid in this heavy grass. But a super line hook, EWG style, you know, it's hard to beat that. I don't prefer it. I prefer to snell knot my you know, hooks, and you don't snell knot this one. This is just you know, use a standard Palomar knot or whatever your favorite knot is. You know, the double crescendo, whatever you want to call it. You know, whatever you use. But again, you know, it is effective. It's just not my preference because you know, when you've got the bait, you know, a big this is only a ½ ounce, but you've got your weight. You know, when you let's say the fish has the whole thing in his mouth, you pull it out of his mouth, and typically the weight, you know, the weight's coming out first, and it pops his mouth open. And the bigger the weight you use, the more it's going to pop his mouth open. And so then I feel like it's very easy for that to come straight out. And typically with these style hooks, the hook and the line is almost in perfect, you know, perfect line. This one sits just above the line tie, but it's almost in perfect in line with that. Which, if they're not clamping down on it, and if you've just popped that weight out of its mouth, it's probably not clamping down on it, I feel like your chances of hooking that fish go way down. Where for me, having a straight shank hook, well, I mean, the bass's mouth does not have to be clamped down tight, because even if it's open a little bit, it's still going to catch. where the line is coming out and where the hook point is. And that could be any direction. I mean, it really doesn't matter what direction that is. Plus, if I put a snell knot in that, the line's coming through the eye of the hook. So when you pull tight, it wants to cant. So imagine the line's coming through this weight. You pull it tight and you put pressure on it. It's going to drive this. This is going to come out, but what's going to happen is this hook, this is coming out of the fish's mouth. The hook is going to turn up, or maybe sideways or whatever, but either any direction that it goes, it's going to tend to put that hook right in that fish's mouth. And so here's one that I've got actually rigged up, and I've showed you this before. You've probably seen it somewhere else, but it's the same principle. It drives that hook when you're putting pressure on it up or out, and so I think your percentages go way up for catching a fish. Now, does it tend to ruin more baits? Oh yes. Can you get stuck in cover? Definitely, because let's think about this. If it works for the fish's mouth, it's going to work in anything else. Let's say you get stuck in a limb and you're pulling tight. Well, that hook keeps driving into the tree or rock or weed or whatever it is, so it can get stuck more, and you might lose more baits or even hooks and and sinkers and whatever. But I think it's worth it because my hookup ratio goes way up. But again, that's me. You can have a strong, I know some people have a very strong preference on this, and that's okay. Use what if you've got a strong preference, use that. If you don't, maybe experiment with both. If you're getting a great hookup with this, use it. If you're not, I would definitely try the straight shank hook. That's a Strike King, 4/0. This is a Trokar 4/0 TK 130. But any Superline hook or straight shank hook, would work. I like this one. It's very beefy. I have a pretty strong hook set, and I want something that's going to hold up. And if I put a lot of pressure on those fish trying to get them out, I want it to hold up, and I don't want it to bend out. So I really like this one, and it's got a good bait keeper in it. Some of the ones I've used in the past really don't. So the bait's always sliding down or it mangles it. I don't prefer that. So you can use just a plain old sort of bullet weight, and then you could also go, and I have one, we were using it the other day, but this is more of like a punch setup, or some people call it a slither rig. It's just a weight, and I'll pull this off, and it's got a spot for a skirt on it. If you see that, the skirt just goes right on, and it fits right on there, and it's designed for it. So again, if you snell knot that, it works the same way as this one. It's going to drive that hook up and out, and so I use that quite a bit if I'm fishing through heavier cover, heavier grass maybe, and the jig is having a hard time getting through. I will do something like this, where maybe I want the bigger bite. Typically a skirt is going to give you a bigger bite because it has a bigger profile, and it's not always, this is just typically, but if you really want to fish a skirt and it's thick cover, sometimes going to something like this is much easier. It'll get through cover faster and smoother. The jig, again, typically gets you a bigger bite. The creature bait, so sometimes if you're maybe getting short strike or not getting enough bites and you just want some fish, I typically go with something like this. And I go with as light a weight most of the time. I go with as light a weight as I can get away with. That right there is a 1/2 ounce. Sometimes I go with a 3/8 ounce, but I'll go as reasonably light as I can. There is a whole nother school of thought. Some people want to trigger a bite, so getting something to fall very, very fast can sometimes get them just to react. And that I've done that, and it works. I tend to make a nice soft presentation and find that I get more bites with a slower fall. Gives them more time to see it, and it's kind of in their face, and by being very subtle, it just appears, and they tend to lash out or run away, and I'm obviously hoping they lash out at it, but that's what I find. Some people say, no, I love a 1.5 ounces, even if I don't need it to get through cover, because it drops super fast, and they react to it, and that, again, that's a whole nother school of thought, and it works. It's, again, not my preference. I prefer not using that heavy weight if I don't have to, but it might be yours, so use it if that's the case. And then there's obviously the situation where you just need it to get through heavy cover, heavy mats. We don't have a lot of that in Maine, so you'll very rarely see me with a super, a 7-Eleven flipping stick with an 1.5 ounce weight. Just, we don't have the cover for it. I don't need it. If I was in Florida, absolutely. If I was in California, definitely. But I'm not, so I typically don't. You're not going to see that on my boat very often. But if you're in that situation, use it. It's a tool. Use it. And then going back, kind of the whole setup. So, and you can look up the video on, I've get done on knots, and I cover snell knotting, tying a snell knot. But you're gonna put your bobber stops on. So, I've traditionally used just sort of a very generic bobber stop. I'm trying sort of a higher end bobber stop, a much bigger. If you look at the difference, you can see this one is much bigger. I mean, it's 3 times the size of this little generic one. And what I found for me is when I'm using the generic one, I need at least 3 of those on there. Because sometimes I'm trying to skip that bait. If I was never going to skip the bait, maybe I wouldn't put so many on there. You might want that weight to slide up the hook. As soon as you set the hook and the fish starts shaking its mouth, maybe you want that hook to slide way up, that sinker, the weight to slide way up the rod, so they can't use it as leverage to pop that hook out of their mouth, because they will do that. And the bigger the weight, the more likely it is they're going to pop the hook out of their mouth. So maybe you don't want a super heavy bobber stop, or you only want 1 or 2. I'm typically skipping that bait some, and when the line gets wet, I'll even do it sometimes if I'm trying to adjust something. I'll wet the line, and you can see it moves so much easier when it's wet. Well, obviously in the water it's wet, so it's going to move easier than when it's dry. So you got to factor that in. But if you find that you try to skip that bait and it just it rolls on you, and the sinker's way up, a foot up your line, well, you're not going to be able to skip that. You're going to backlash. It's going to make a giant mess. So you're going to need to put a few more bobber stops in there, or maybe just one really heavy duty bobber stop. Which I'm kind of liking now. I've still got some of the old ones, so I'm using them up, but I do like these larger bobber stops, for really planting that bait in there. So you put your bobber stops on, you run your line through your sinker, and then you tie your favorite knot on. I like a snell knot. You can use whatever you want. And then obviously if it's a punch, the sliver rig, punch rig, same exact concept. This one's got, because I'm not skipping it as much, I've only got 2 bobber stops on there. I'm not skipping this bait typically. It doesn't skip very well. So I'm just trying to punch it through the cover, and then, I don't mind if they shake and the weight comes way up there. And when I'm just punching it through cover, the weight's not going to slide up. I want it to stay together, because if I'm putting it through cover, I don't want the weight to come through and not the bait. Or the sinker drops down first and the bait's way up here in the cover. I don't want that. I want the whole thing to go down together. But you can use something like that. Obviously, you can use a jig. The jig is tremendous, and in lighter cover, boy, it's hard to beat. And you can get jigs with, this is more of a grass jig. It's got a pointier head. This is the Strike King. Greg Hackney. I really like that jig. The hook is so solid. I mean, that's practically a tuna hook on there. The guard's good. It's tough. You can trim it down if you need to. The skirt's nice. Plenty of skirt on it. It's got a good bait keeper. It holds up really, really well. So I like that one a lot. The Greg Hackney, the Hack Attack jig. That's a 1/2 ounce. That's probably, if I had one, that's what I'd go with. Some people, feel differently. Again, more than welcome to it. I will put a 3/4 on every once in a while, but not often. If it's getting to where I'm having such a hard time getting through cover, I'm probably going to use some type of a punch rig, or just a creature bait and get through that cover easier. So a 1/2 ounce is pretty normal for me. And there are days, again, typically, you're going to get more bites on a creature bait, bigger bites on a jig, but that's not always the case. Every once in a while it totally flip-flops, so experiment a little bit. I typically have multiple. I mean, here I've got 3 different rods rigged up with all 3 different setups. if you have the luxury of being able to do that, that's a great idea. If you don't, just start with the one that you're most confident in, and then experiment from there if you're not getting the bites that you think you should, whether it's the quantity or the size. Let's see, what else do we need to cover here? Rods, line. If I'm in grass or there's a stain in the water, I am absolutely using braid. There's no question about it. Your feeling goes way up. You've got a lot more strength, and it's very small in diameter. A 65-pound braid is, I don't even remember now what it is, but it's not like some giant line size. I want to say it's like 12 or 14 pound, mono. That's not very big. So if I can get away with it, boy, I am going to use braid. And I do, you can even see sort of the difference. There's the green, but when it gets used, it turns white. So I take a big Sharpie marker, cut a couple grooves in the marker, and run it up and down the line, and it keeps the line dark. Again, it helps me in my head. I'm not 100% sure that it helps, but I'm pretty sure it helps. So I'm going to keep doing it. But again, if you're like, that is ridiculous, I am absolutely not doing it, don't do it. But I do know fish can see line, and so I'm trying to do everything that I can do to not let them see it. And then, so line, we covered line. Reels, I like a high-speed reel. If I can, minimum for me is probably 7.3 to 1, somewhere in that 7 to 1 range. And if I can get an 8 to 1, 8.5 to 1, that's even better. I really want to be able to pick up some line. So if I'm pitching, I want to make a pitch. I'm fishing it in that exact spot. I'm not fishing it all the way back to the boat typically. I'm going to fish it in that spot. And then I'm going to wind it in real quick and make another one. So if it's a real slow reel and I'm over here winding and it's finally, okay, it's finally in. And there's another guy that can wind, out he goes. Wind, out he goes. That's a lot better. I'm over here just winding for half an hour and then I can make another pitch. Well, that's not very helpful. It's in, you want to make a bunch of presentations. That's kind of the name of the game of, this pitching technique. So you want, speed is important. And then also every once in a while you'll get a fish that picks it up and just starts coming at you. And you need to be picking up line fast, set the hook, and just get them in the boat. I don't play these fish. I set the hook and I grind them into the boat. I've got heavy line, heavy hooks. The drag on the reels tightened all the way down. So I'm just grinding them to the boat. The more time you give them with a weight in their mouth, and time to shake, and in heavy cover, typically, or in some type of heavy cover, the more time you give them, the more time they have to break you off, get you wrapped up, throw the weight, use the weight to throw the hook. So I just want to get them in the boat. I don't want to give them even time to think about it and fight. I want them to be flopping in the boat because they're so angry because I just realized they were hooked. So I'm grinding them right to the boat. And that's what I'd recommend for you. In this kind of a setup, you really just get them out of the cover and into the boat. Then you can, let them have their fight. Let's see, rods. I kind of go two directions on this. I don't typically use, like I just said, a big, huge 7-Eleven 8-foot flipping stick. That's just not what I need. I do have them, but I hardly use them. I'm typically in that 7.3 to 7.6 range. That's my normal, pitching setup, is that 7.3 to 7.6. If I'm in and around cover, I do have like a skipping rod that's 7.1, but typically if I'm in and around cover, I'm going to shorten the rod, so that's where it's going to, come into a 7.3. I maybe don't need to go pitch quite as far, and I think it still gives you tremendous power if you've got a heavy rod, heavy action rod. I think it still gives you tremendous power to get those fish out, but kind of 7.3, and maybe also on your build. If you're a smaller person, maybe a smaller rod. If you're a bigger person and you say, geez, I'm 6'7", I can handle a big rod. Okay, good, use a big rod. But if you're getting fatigued, well, maybe downsize just a little bit and go with this little shorter, easier rod to manage. And again, if you're in and around boat docks and things, you sometimes want a shorter rod. You can be more accurate in your presentations. than you could with a big rod. So somewhere in that 7.3 to usually 7.6 for me. I use the best rod I can afford because you are looking to feel, you're watching your line, but you're looking to feel those bites as well. So I'm using as good a rod as I can afford. In the past, I couldn't afford much. So I had to use a more reasonable rod. And this is the rod that I typically used. It's the Veritas. It's a 7.3 medium heavy actually, but I feel it fishes more like a heavy. And it has tremendous power. I never felt like I was going to break the rod no matter how much pressure I put on those fish. I really like this rod for it. Again, not the most sensitive rod, but on a budget, it was 99 bucks and you could find them on sale for usually 79. I'm not sure, maybe the price has gone up a little bit. And I've used all kinds of more reasonable reel. This is a Jimmy Morris Carbon Light reel. It works great. I've used some Akuma reels. They are very reasonable and they're a good reel. They squeak a little bit. They sound a little bit, grindy, but they work well. And I've used them for years, pitching and frogging, which is very hard on them. And they've held up terrifically. I clean them and oil them, but I don't do anything crazy. And they just keep holding up. But that is a very reasonable combo if you're looking for something, to flip with and you're kind of on a budget. And then I've got a GLX. This is a flipping rod. It's quite a bit heavier action. This is a heavy. It's a 7.5 fast heavy. I like it. It's got great power. This is the GLX. It's a heavy as well. It's a 7.5 heavy. This is a let's see, flip and pitch rod as well. This is a, what is this one? Flip pitch rod. So they're both flip pitch, but they're slightly different in what they are. But anyway, I really like this one. This one is tremendous for the money. It's a killer rod. It's got a great warranty, obviously. It's G Loomis, but it's the 894C, 7.5 heavy. It is terrific. I really like that rod. And then if we go really high end, and these are both Mentaniums on here. I like them a lot. These are the XG, so an 8.5 to 1. Really like them. They've got the bigger power handles on them. You can pick up some line and you've got some power with it. And then this is a very high-end combo. This is the Conquest, and it is as well, what is it exactly? It is the 904, so that is a 7.6 heavy, and I really like that. And is it the MBR, Mag Bass, so the MBR, and I really like that rod. You can feel everything, and it's still got a ton of power. And then that's on a Mentanium XG DC reel, and I like the DC. If you have the money to throw at it, it's nice. I can still create a heck of a backlash if I'm working hard at it, but you can skip that bait a lot easier and have fewer backlashes with the DC reel. And it's nice if you have the money to throw at it. It is nice, and it's a fairly light reel, good power still. I like it a lot. But so those are kind of the higher end of it. You can go, and there are others. I'm confident that there's probably 100 decent rods out there. But if you're looking for budget, boy, I have a hard time getting away from the Abu Garcia, the Veritas rods. And then if you're looking for something high end, that GLX, the Conquest. I've got an NRX that I use for skipping. Boy, they are terrific. The NRX, I always feel, it's probably not true, but I always feel like there's a better chance that I'm gonna snap one. But the GLX and the Conquest, I don't feel that way with those. But again, that's just me. You might say, Andrew, you're crazy. I use my NRX all the time and it's tremendous. And that is probably true, but I love the NRX, but I typically don't use it for, pitching and heavy cover. That's just not my preference, but it might be yours. No problem. Not looking to throw stones or anything, or throw hate, but that's just my preference. Use what you're confident in. All right, guys, I think that's a wrap. I think I've covered everything. If you've got questions, leave them in the video description. This video's, again, I look at the time, I'm looking right at it. It's way too long, but I wanted to try to really cover all these questions. Some friends were asking about it, and I wanted to do a good job putting it all together in one package for you, for them and for you. I guess that's it. Again, if you've got questions, leave it below. I'll get to that and see if if I've missed something. I do want to answer it. All right, guys, stay with it, stay learning. Until next time, I can't wait to get you on the boat. Probably going to need to put together a useless comments reel, and pack all of the stupid things I say into very specific, useless videos. That's what I'm thinking. Oh, that's what I'm thinking. Just have somewhere to put this crap. I'm gonna give this guy the same motivational speech. Get bigger, I don't know if fish eat Wheaties or not, but take some protein, Hit the gym a little bit more. Ever ask yourself, am I doing something wrong? What, are you crazy? Absolutely not. I just need to find the perfect color. Yes, I ask myself if I'm doing something. Then when you catch one, you say, why did I ever doubt myself? You know what it is? It's probably that I'm not wearing a mask. The fish are worried about social distancing. If I put a mask on, maybe I'd catch fish. So I could do one of these businesses, and do my flipping. And then maybe I could catch a 10-pounder because he's not worried about social distancing. That's probably what it is. Got it all figured out now. Oh, it's a fish! It's a fish! It's a giant! Yeah. That might have been the problem right there. I don't know if you saw that. We jerked him into the boat and jerked him right onto the other. That's funny. I don't care who you are, that's funny. Fish never knew what hit him. People want to see the real you, just not all of you. That's probably accurate in my case. And maybe they don't even want to see the real me, but they definitely don't want to see all of the real me. Oh my word, I enjoy that stuff.